She swept floors without a word, invisible to most. The morning shift at Fort Bragg began like any other, with Maria Santos pushing her cart down the sterile hallways of the Special Operations Command building, her worn work boots making soft sounds against the polished linoleum. To the soldiers hurrying past with their coffee and classified folders, she was just part of the background, another member of the civilian maintenance crew who kept the base running while they focused on more important matters. At 55, Maria moved with the careful precision of someone whose body remembered more than it let on. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her custodial uniform hung loose on her small frame, making her appear even more invisible than she already was. She kept her eyes down, focused on her work, speaking only when necessary, and even then in the quiet, accented English that marked her as someone from somewhere else. But when Major General Rebecca Stone came walking down that hallway during her morning inspection, when her sharp eyes caught sight of something that made her stop dead in her tracks, everything changed. The general stared at the small pin on Maria's collar, a purple heart ribbon that seemed impossibly out of place on a janitor's uniform. Because women weren't supposed to have purple hearts from Iraq. Women weren't supposed to have been in combat. Unless you knew the real story. They had scoffed when she ran toward the smoke that day in Fallujah. "Stay back, you're medical," someone had shouted as the IED explosion rocked their convoy. But Maria Santos, then Specialist Santos, 68th Combat Support Hospital, didn't listen. She tore open the wreckage of the burning Humvee and dragged out Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, a man twice her size, before the secondary explosion hit. After that day, no one questioned her again. No one doubted that some people are born to run toward danger instead of away from it. Welcome to the Silent Salute. Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. Your support means everything to us, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit that subscribe button. We're growing every day, and every single one of you makes that possible. Thank you for being part of our community. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was home to the 18 Airborne Corps and the United States Army Special Operations Command, making it one of the most strategically important military installations in the world. The base housed elite units like the 82nd Airborne Division and Delta Force, where America's most specialized warriors trained for missions that would never make the evening news. It was a place where legends were born and heroes were forged in the crucible of the world's most demanding military training. The Special Operations Command building where Maria worked was the nerve center for operations spanning the globe. Behind its unremarkable exterior, colonels and generals planned missions that could change the course of history, while intelligence analysts pored over satellite imagery and communications intercepts that revealed the movements of America's enemies. It was serious, important work that required the highest levels of security clearance and professional competence. But Maria Santos saw none of that importance. To her, it was just another building that needed cleaning, another set of offices that generated trash bins full of shredded documents, another collection of hallways that required daily mopping and maintenance. She had been working at Fort Bragg for 8 years, ever since her medical discharge from the Army and her subsequent struggles to find meaningful employment in the civilian world. The other custodial staff were a mix of retired military personnel and local civilians, good people who appreciated steady work and understood the importance of discretion when cleaning offices that handled classified materials. They had accepted Maria as one of their own, despite her obvious reluctance to talk about her military service or the circumstances that had led her to this humble position. But Maria carried secrets that would have shocked her coworkers if they had known. The purple heart pinned to her collar wasn't some family heirloom or borrowed decoration. It was earned with her own blood on a dusty road outside Fallujah in 2006, when she had made a decision that saved lives and ended her military career in the same moment. The careful way she moved wasn't just the caution of middle age. It was the unconscious habit of someone whose back had been rebuilt with steel rods after being thrown 20 feet by an explosion. Most importantly, the quiet demeanor that made her nearly invisible to the soldiers around her wasn't shyness or lack of confidence. It was the protective shell that combat veterans often develop when they're trying to blend into a world that doesn't understand what they've seen, what they've done, or what they've sacrificed in service to their country. Maria had enlisted in the Army in 1991, straight out of high school in El Paso, Texas. She was 18 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and weighed barely 100 pounds. But she had a determination that impressed her drill sergeants and a natural aptitude for medical training that made her valuable to the Army's healthcare system. She spent her first few years stationed at various hospitals in the United States, learning her trade and developing the skills that would later save lives in ways she couldn't imagine. When the Iraq War began in 2003, Maria volunteered for deployment despite having no obligation to serve in a combat zone. As a medic, she could have remained safely stateside, treating routine injuries and illnesses while other soldiers faced the dangers of urban warfare. But Maria believed in the mission, believed in her fellow soldiers, and believed that her skills were needed where the fighting was heaviest. Her first deployment took her to Baghdad in 2004, where she served with a forward surgical team that treated the most severely wounded casualties from across the theater. It was brutal, exhausting work that required her to make life-and-death decisions under conditions that civilian doctors couldn't imagine. But Maria thrived in the chaos, her small hands proving remarkably steady under pressure, her calm voice providing comfort to wounded soldiers who were fighting for their lives. It was during her second deployment, in 2006, that everything changed. Maria was serving with the 68th Combat Support Hospital, but she had been temporarily attached to a convoy security mission because of her medical expertise. The military was still learning how to fight an insurgency that used improvised explosive devices as their primary weapon, and every convoy needed medical personnel who could provide immediate trauma care if things went wrong. On the morning of September 12, 2006, things went very wrong indeed. The convoy was traveling from FOB Liberty to a small outpost near Fallujah, carrying supplies and personnel for a routine resupply mission. Maria was riding in the third vehicle, a heavily armored Humvee that also carried Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, a career infantry soldier who was nearing the end of his deployment, and 3 other soldiers whose families were already planning their welcome home celebrations. The IED that hit their vehicle was buried in a pothole that had been filled with fresh asphalt the night before. It was a sophisticated device, probably built by former Iraqi military engineers, and it contained enough explosives to flip a 20,000-pound armored vehicle like a child's toy. The blast threw the Humvee off the road and into a concrete barrier, crushing the passenger compartment and starting a fire that quickly spread to the fuel tank. Maria regained consciousness hanging upside down in her seat harness, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead and her ears ringing from the concussion of the explosion. Around her, she could hear the groans and cries of the other soldiers, but she couldn't see them through the smoke and dust that filled the destroyed vehicle. Her medical training kicked in immediately, overriding the shock and confusion that might have paralyzed someone else. She fumbled for her seatbelt release, dropped to what had been the roof of the Humvee, and began checking on her fellow soldiers. 2 were conscious but trapped under twisted metal. 1 was unconscious but breathing. The 4th, Staff Sergeant Torres, was pinned under the wreckage with his legs crushed and blood pooling around his head. Outside the vehicle, Maria could hear the voices of the convoy's security team as they established a perimeter and called for evacuation. Someone was shouting orders, someone else was calling for medical assistance, and in the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching. Help was coming, but it might not arrive in time. That's when Maria smelled the gasoline. The Humvee's fuel tank had been ruptured in the explosion, and gasoline was pouring onto the hot metal of the engine block. It was only a matter of time before the entire vehicle became an inferno, and anyone still trapped inside would be burned alive. Maria had maybe 2 minutes to get everyone out before the fire reached the fuel. She tried to open the vehicle's rear door, but it was crushed shut. The windows were too small to pull an unconscious man through, especially one of Torres's size. The only way out was through the shattered windshield, which meant dragging each soldier through broken glass and twisted metal while fighting against time and the spreading fire. Maria made her decision in an instant. She would get Torres out first because his injuries were the most severe, then come back for the others. It was a calculated risk. Leaving the less injured soldiers might seem counterintuitive, but Torres would die without immediate attention, while the others might survive a few more minutes. She crawled through the wreckage to where Torres was pinned, ignoring the glass that cut her hands and knees, ignoring the pain in her back, where she had been thrown against the vehicle's armor plating. Torres was unconscious, bleeding heavily from a head wound, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. He probably had internal injuries in addition to his crushed legs, which meant that moving him could kill him just as surely as leaving him behind. But Maria had no choice. She could hear the fire spreading, could feel the heat building inside the destroyed vehicle. In 30 seconds, maybe less, the gasoline would ignite and turn their armored protection into a death trap. She grabbed Torres under his arms and began pulling him toward the front of the vehicle, toward the shattered windshield that represented their only hope of escape. He was nearly twice her size, 6 feet tall, and probably 200 pounds of muscle and equipment. But desperation gave Maria strength she didn't know she possessed. The windshield opening was barely large enough for one person to squeeze through, much less large enough to drag an unconscious soldier. Maria had to twist and push and pull, cutting herself on the broken glass, feeling something in her back tear as she struggled to maneuver Torres's dead weight through the narrow opening. That's when she heard the voices outside. "Santos, what the hell are you doing? Get out of there. Stay back, you're medical. Let the infantry handle this. The whole thing's going to blow. Get away from the vehicle." But Maria didn't listen. She couldn't listen. Torres was depending on her, and she had taken an oath to do no harm, to preserve life, to never abandon a patient who needed her care. She tore open what remained of the windshield with her bare hands, cutting herself even more deeply, and managed to get Torres's head and shoulders through the opening. She was halfway out of the vehicle, with Torres's unconscious form draped across her back, when the secondary explosion hit. The gasoline had finally reached the engine block, and the resulting fireball engulfed the rear half of the Humvee in an instant. The blast threw Maria and Torres clear of the vehicle, slamming them into the concrete barrier with enough force to crack ribs and fracture vertebrae. Maria's last memory before losing consciousness was the sight of Torres's chest rising and falling, the knowledge that he was still breathing, still alive because of what she had done. When Maria regained consciousness 3 days later in a field hospital in Baghdad, she learned that her actions had saved not just Torres's life, but the lives of the other 3 soldiers as well. While she was dragging Torres from the wreckage, other members of the convoy had managed to pull the remaining soldiers to safety through the same opening she had created. All 4 men survived, though Torres required months of surgery and rehabilitation to recover from his injuries. Maria's own injuries were severe enough to end her military career. The explosion had fractured 3 vertebrae in her lower back, broken 4 ribs, and caused internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. But more than the physical damage was the psychological trauma of nearly dying while trying to save others, the weight of knowing that her split-second decision had been the difference between life and death for 4 fellow soldiers. The Army awarded Maria the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, along with a Bronze Star with valor for her actions in saving Torres and facilitating the rescue of the other soldiers. The citation read, "Specialist Santos's selfless courage and instant willingness to risk her own life for her fellow soldiers exemplifies the highest traditions of military service and reflects great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army." But awards and citations couldn't fix Maria's broken back or ease the nightmares that plagued her sleep. She was medically retired from the Army in 2007 with full disability benefits, but the transition to civilian life was harder than any combat mission she had ever faced. Everything she had known, everything she had been good at, everything that had given her life meaning, it was all tied to her identity as a soldier and a medic. She tried various jobs over the years, working as a civilian paramedic, training as a nurse's aide, even attempting to finish her college degree. But nothing felt right. Nothing gave her the sense of purpose and belonging that she had found in the Army. She was a warrior without a war, a healer without a mission, adrift in a civilian world that didn't understand what she had sacrificed or what she continued to carry. It was her therapist at the VA who suggested she look for work on a military base. "You need to be around people who understand," she had said. "You need to be part of something larger than yourself again, even if it's not in the same capacity as before." The custodial position at Fort Bragg wasn't glamorous, but it put Maria back in an environment where she felt comfortable. The discipline, the sense of mission, the camaraderie among people who had served, it all helped to fill the void that civilian life had created. She wasn't a medic anymore, wasn't saving lives or treating wounded soldiers, but she was contributing to the mission in her own small way. The morning of November 11th, 2024, Veterans Day, began like any other for Maria. She arrived at the base at 0530, signed in with security, and collected her cleaning supplies from the maintenance shed. Her route was always the same. Start with the administrative offices on the first floor, work her way up to the secure briefing rooms on the third floor, then finish with the common areas and restrooms. The first few hours passed without incident. Maria emptied trash cans, mopped floors, restocked supply closets, and went about her work with the same methodical precision that had once made her one of the best combat medics in her unit. She rarely interacted with the soldiers and officers who passed her in the hallways, and they rarely paid attention to her presence. But at 0800 hours, as Maria was cleaning the hallway outside the commanding general's office, Major General Rebecca Stone emerged from the elevator with her aide and several other senior officers. Stone was a rising star in the Army, a former helicopter pilot who had flown combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan before transitioning to command positions. At 51, she was being considered for a third star and a position on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Stone was at Fort Bragg for a routine inspection of Special Operations Command, reviewing readiness levels and operational capabilities across the various units under her command. It was standard procedure, the kind of high-level assessment that happened regularly throughout the military hierarchy. She was walking briskly toward a briefing room, her mind focused on the intelligence reports she was about to review, when something caught her attention. At first, it was just the ribbon pinned to the janitor's collar. Stone had trained herself to notice military decorations, understanding that they often told stories worth knowing about the people who wore them. But as her eyes focused on the purple and white ribbon, recognition hit her with stunning force. Stone stopped so abruptly that her aide nearly walked into her back. She stared at Maria with growing recognition and disbelief, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. The Purple Heart ribbon was authentic. Stone had seen enough of them to know the difference between real decorations and imitations. But women weren't supposed to have Purple Hearts from Iraq, at least not according to the official policies that had been in place during the early years of the war. Women served in support roles, medical units, logistics positions. They weren't supposed to be in direct combat, weren't supposed to be exposed to the kind of enemy action that earned Purple Hearts. Unless, of course, the enemy didn't respect those distinctions. Unless the war had evolved in ways that made traditional gender roles irrelevant. Stone studied Maria's face, noting the way she carried herself despite her humble position. There was something in her posture, even while pushing a mop cart, that spoke of military bearing. The way she moved was efficient and purposeful, the unconscious habits of someone who had been trained to function under pressure. "Excuse me," Stone said, her voice carrying the authority of command but tempered with curiosity. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Maria looked up, startled by the direct address from such a high-ranking officer. Her first instinct was to assume she had done something wrong, that her work wasn't meeting standards, that she was about to lose the job that had become her anchor in civilian life. "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there a problem with my work?" Stone stepped closer, her expression becoming more gentle but no less focused. "No problem at all. I was just wondering about the ribbon on your collar. That's a Purple Heart, isn't it?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She had been wearing the ribbon for 8 years, and in all that time, only a handful of people had even noticed it, much less asked about it. Most civilians didn't recognize military decorations, and most soldiers were too polite or too busy to question a janitor about her service record. "Yes, ma'am," Maria said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the small ribbon. "It is." Stone's expression showed a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Would you mind telling me how you earned it? If you're comfortable sharing, that is." Maria hesitated, uncertain how to respond. She had spent years avoiding this exact conversation, deflecting questions about her military service, trying to blend into the background and avoid drawing attention to herself. But there was something in the general's tone, something that suggested genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. "I was a combat medic, ma'am. 68th Combat Support Hospital. I was wounded in an IED attack in Iraq in 2006. The words came out in a rush, as if Maria wanted to get them over with as quickly as possible. But Stone's reaction was immediate and profound. Her eyes widened with recognition and respect, and she straightened to an even more formal posture. September 12, 2006, Stone said, her voice filled with certainty. Outside Fallujah, you saved the life of Staff Sergeant Michael Torres. The effect on Maria was electric. Her face went pale, and the mop handle slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers to clatter against the floor. How could this general possibly know the specific details of an incident that had occurred 18 years ago? How could she know Torres's name, know the date, know the circumstances? How do you? Maria began, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process what was happening. Stone smiled, but there was emotion behind the expression. Because Staff Sergeant Torres is my husband. He's been telling your story for 18 years, and he's never stopped looking for the combat medic who saved his life. The revelation hit Maria like another explosion. Michael Torres, the soldier she had dragged from a burning vehicle, the man whose life she had saved at the cost of her own military career, was married to the general standing before her. The random chance, the incredible coincidence of their meeting, seemed impossible and yet undeniably real. Your husband is? Maria whispered, unable to complete the sentence. Chief Master Sergeant Michael Torres, retired, Stone said, her voice thick with emotion. He transferred to the Air Force after his recovery, served another 15 years, and retired 3 years ago. But he's never forgotten what you did for him. He's never stopped talking about the little medic who risked everything to pull him out of that Humvee. The hallway around them had gone silent as word of the conversation spread among the passing personnel. Officers and enlisted soldiers had stopped to listen, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Maria stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by the weight of memory and the impossible coincidence of this meeting. Ma'am, Maria said, her voice shaking with emotion. Is he okay? Did he recover fully? Stone's smile was radiant. He's perfect. He walks with a slight limp, and he has some scars, but he's healthy and strong and living a full life. We have 2 daughters together, Sarah and Rebecca. He coaches their soccer teams and teaches them about courage by telling them your story. Tears were streaming down Maria's face now, and she made no attempt to hide them. For 18 years, she had wondered about Torres, had worried that her actions might not have been enough, that he might have died from his injuries despite her efforts. The nightmares that plagued her sleep often featured scenarios where she was too slow, too weak, too late to save him. He talks about me? Maria asked, her voice barely audible. Every Veterans Day, Stone replied. Every Memorial Day. Every time someone asks him about his service. He tells them about the combat medic who taught him what real courage looks like. He tells them about the soldier who proved that heroes come in all sizes, and that sometimes the smallest people have the biggest hearts. The emotion in the hallway was palpable. Several of the watching soldiers were wiping away tears, moved by the reunion they were witnessing. Stone's aide was recording the conversation on his phone, understanding instinctively that this was a moment that needed to be preserved. Would you like to see him? Stone asked gently. He's here on base today, visiting the Wounded Warrior Unit. He volunteers there, helping other soldiers who are dealing with combat injuries. Maria nodded wordlessly, overwhelmed by the possibility of seeing Torres again, of learning what had become of the man whose life she had saved at such great cost to herself. Stone immediately turned to her aide. Colonel Patterson, please call Chief Torres and ask him to come to my office immediately. Tell him I have someone he needs to meet, but don't tell him who. I want this to be a surprise. As they waited for Torres to arrive, Stone asked Maria about her life after the Army, her struggles with civilian employment, her decision to work at Fort Bragg. Maria found herself opening up in ways she hadn't done in years, sharing the difficulties of transition, the challenges of living with chronic pain, the sense of lost purpose that had plagued her since her medical retirement. You know, Stone said thoughtfully, we have an opening in our Wounded Warrior Liaison office. It's a civilian position, but it requires someone with medical training and personal experience with combat injuries. Someone who understands what our wounded soldiers are going through. Maria looked up with surprise. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to be a healer again, Stone replied. To use your experience and your compassion to help other soldiers who are walking the same path you walked. It would mean leaving the custodial work, but it would also mean returning to the mission that called you to serve in the first place. Before Maria could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway as a tall, distinguished man in civilian clothes approached the group. He walked with a slight limp, just as Stone had described, but his bearing was unmistakably military despite his retirement. As he got closer, Maria could see the familiar features she remembered from that day in Fallujah. Older now, lined with the passage of years, but unmistakably the same man she had pulled from a burning vehicle 18 years ago. Torres saw Stone first, offering a casual salute and a smile. "You wanted to see me, General? What's the mystery about?" Stone stepped aside, revealing Maria for the first time. "Mike, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Maria Santos." For a moment, Torres looked confused, unsure why his wife was introducing him to a member of the custodial staff. But as his eyes focused on Maria's face, as recognition dawned and understanding crashed over him like a wave, his entire body went rigid with shock. "My God," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "My God, it's really you." Maria tried to speak, but no words came. She was looking at the living proof that her sacrifice had meaning, that her actions had made a difference, that the pain and loss she had endured had been worth something after all. Torres moved toward her slowly, as if approaching something precious and fragile. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee in front of her, ignoring the watching crowd, ignoring protocol, ignoring everything except the woman who had given him back his life. "I've been looking for you for 18 years, he said, his voice thick with tears. "I've wanted to thank you, to tell you what you did for me, what you did for my family. You saved my life, and I've never been able to properly thank you for it." Maria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I was just doing my job. Any medic would have done the same thing." Torres shook his head firmly. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have looked at that burning vehicle and decided it was too dangerous, too risky. You looked at it and saw a soldier who needed help. You risked everything to pull me out of there, and I've spent every day since then trying to be worthy of that sacrifice." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something that made Maria gasp. It was a photograph, worn from years of handling, showing Torres in his hospital bed shortly after the attack. In the picture, he was holding a handwritten sign that read, "Thank you, Specialist Santos. I will never forget. I've carried this picture for 18 years, Torres said. I've shown it to my daughters, told them about the angel who saved their father's life. I've used your story to teach them about courage, about service, about doing what's right even when it's hard." The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. Maria felt the years of guilt and doubt and purposelessness beginning to lift from her shoulders, replaced by the understanding that her actions had rippled through time in ways she had never imagined. She had saved more than one life that day. She had preserved a future, a family, a legacy of service that continued to this day. "There's something else," Torres said, reaching into his other pocket. "Something I've been carrying for you." He withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a set of silver medical wings, the combat medical badge that Maria had never received because women weren't officially recognized as combat personnel during her service. "The Army may not have given you the recognition you deserved at the time, but everyone who knows your story understands what you are: a combat medic who saved lives under fire, a warrior who proved that heroism has nothing to do with gender or size or official job descriptions." Maria accepted the badge with trembling hands, understanding its significance not just as a military decoration, but as recognition of her identity as a soldier, a healer, a person whose service had mattered in the most fundamental way possible. "There's one more thing," Stone said, stepping forward with an official-looking document. "Effective immediately, you're being offered a position as Senior Wounded Warrior Liaison, with a starting salary commensurate with your military experience and medical training. If you accept, you'll be working with soldiers who are dealing with combat injuries, helping them navigate the challenges of recovery and transition." Maria looked at the job offer, then at Torres, then at the assembled soldiers who had witnessed this extraordinary reunion. For the first time in 18 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. "I accept," she said, her voice strong and clear for the first time since the conversation began. "I accept, and I'm honored to serve again." The applause that erupted in the hallway was spontaneous and heartfelt. A recognition not just of Maria's heroism 18 years ago, but of her willingness to continue serving, to use her experience and her compassion to help others who were walking the same difficult path she had traveled. As the crowd began to disperse and normal base operations resumed, Torres and Stone walked with Maria toward her new office, discussing the details of her new position and the soldiers she would be helping. But more than the practical considerations, they talked about the meaning of service, the importance of second chances, and the power of one person's actions to change multiple lives across multiple generations. That evening, at a small dinner with Torres, Stone, and their daughters, Maria learned about the family she had helped to create. Sarah, 16, was planning to attend West Point and become an Army officer like her stepmother. Rebecca, 14, wanted to be a doctor and serve with Doctors Without Borders. Both girls spoke about their father's story, about the combat medic who had saved his life, about the example of courage and selflessness that had shaped their understanding of what it meant to serve others. "You're not just the person who saved my husband's life," Stone told Maria as they sat around the dinner table. "You're the person who made our family possible. Sarah and Rebecca exist because of what you did that day in Fallujah. Your heroism is literally part of their DNA." Maria looked around the table at the faces of the family she had helped to create, understanding for the first time that her sacrifice had been about more than just saving one soldier's life. It had been about preserving possibilities, protecting futures, ensuring that love and service and courage could continue to flourish in the world. Sometimes a hero doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes she's a small woman in a janitor's uniform, cleaning floors while carrying the weight of unrecognized sacrifice. Sometimes she's the person who runs toward danger instead of away from it, who chooses to risk everything for someone else's chance at life and love and family. Maria Santos had saved Michael Torres's life 18 years ago on a dusty road outside Fallujah. But her real heroism was in what came after. The years of quiet struggle, the daily choice to keep serving despite pain and loss, the willingness to find new ways to heal and help and make a difference in the world. The Purple Heart on her collar wasn't just a decoration. It was a reminder that courage comes in all forms, that heroism often goes unrecognized, and that the greatest victories are sometimes the ones that take decades to fully understand. Sometimes saving one life means saving an entire future, and sometimes the smallest person in the room is the one who changes everything. This story was brought to you by the Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who sacrificed in silence, who carried their heroism quietly while the world overlooked their contributions? Someone who proved that courage isn't about size or official recognition, but about the willingness to do what's right when everything else falls apart? Tell us in the comments about the unsung heroes in your life, the people who run toward danger instead of away from it, who choose service over safety and others over themselves. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, if you believe that the sacrifices of our service members, especially those whose heroism doesn't fit traditional narratives, deserve to be remembered and honored, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue to share the stories of extraordinary people who remind us that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the person who changes everything is the one you'd least expect.